Hello and welcome to the Expanding Horizons guest speaker series organized by Henri Hodge, the 2023 Fulbright ETA working at Unipampa, Bagé, Rio Grande do Sul. The first speaker in the guest speaker series is Joel Tillman. I hope you enjoy the presentation.
So hi, my name is Joel Tillman, and I am a current EDM student at Teachers College at Columbia University here in NYC. Um, Today, I'm going to be talking to you about the work I did to document an endangered dialect of Cantonese in Hong Kong. So my presentation today, which is based off of my thesis work that I did for an MA at the University of Hong Kong, uh, which I completed back in 2017. My presentation will be called Wei Tao Hua, the development of a local variety of a regional dialect, language documentation in Hong Kong. And I hope that you find it full of useful information. So I wanted to start today by reviewing, or maybe for the first time, asking the question, what is language documentation? In the most basic form, it describes the language's phonology and grammar. So what sounds are in a language? Does it have does it have the bilabial stops? Does it have uh, a retroflex sound? And what is the grammar like? Is it a subject, verb, object language? Um, how do the relative clauses work? Is there pro drop? These are the types of questions that we ask when we do language documentation. And a lot of the work in this field really centers on endangered or understudied languages, dialects, or varieties. And I include each of those terms because part of the work of the language, um, the person who does the language documentation is to really see, well, can these communities understand each other? Um, what makes it, a dialect? What is the same and what is not quite the same? Um, Oftentimes, it does pair with language revitalization, which is an important technique to, as the name suggests, revitalize um, a language, but to really encourage the language to be spoken with um, either that particular community that you're working with or to provide access to educational materials, that type of thing. And here's a nice quote that I found. Dr. Peter Austin was working at the University of Hong Kong at the time when I was studying. Um, so his quote, language documentation, also known as documentary linguistics, is the subfield of linguistics that deals with creating multi-purpose records of language through audio and video recording of speakers and signers, and with annotation, translation, preservation, and distribution of the resulting materials. So I wanted to bring that up because I think it has a lot of nice nuggets of wisdom here. Um, so note the inclusion of signers, distribution of the materials so that more people have access and, had access from the beginning. And yeah, it is often multimedia. Okay, so why is this important? Why do we care? Um, there are more than 7,000 languages on Earth. Quite a lot. I don't know if you knew that. But about 41% or 2,900 are considered endangered. Furthermore, in the next 100 years, 90% of all languages will become extinct. So that's, that's to me, that's such a wild figure. Um, if that doesn't surprise you, um, you know, it's just really important to know and to be aware. So that's my source for this. And again, but so what? Why do we care? A couple reasons here. Um, so understudied language could have unique grammatical or phonological segments. They could have patterns that, we know theoretically we might expect a language to have, but we just don't have any evidence that humans have used these patterns. Um, Another reason, language is inseparable from culture. Um, and so when we lose a language, we're losing all that culture. Um, and if a language isn't written down, it's not recorded, then that knowledge may be gone forever, and there may not be any way to retrieve it. So that's a lot of information that would be lost. Okay, so let me hone in here to narrow my focus a little bit. This is the actual research that I was, excuse me, that I was working on with Cantonese in Hong Kong. So a little bit of background information. Cantonese speakers can be found in Hong Kong, Taiwan, the US, and Canada. Hong Kong is primarily Cantonese speakers. Um, and also, I wanted to explain Cantonese is not the same as Mandarin, um, even though they both share a writing system. So a lot of the time, colloquially, you'll hear people refer to both languages as Chinese, and you'll just hear, "Oh, I'm a Chinese speaker," even from speakers of Cantonese and Mandarin. But from a linguistic, technical perspective, they're different languages. Um, the other thing is that a lot of Cantonese speakers know some Mandarin and vice versa. Um, so Weitawa, the dialects I was working with, sometimes called Weitao, um, it is not the only dialect of Cantonese. There are many, many. Um, uh, I think there was a study, a Pearl River Delta study, I want to say, don't quote me on that, but has had some 30, 40 dialects. So the term dialect is preferred by the speakers of this particular Weitawa dialects that I was working, but they're not always mutually intelligible. So if you have this Weitawa speaker, for example, they might not be able to communicate with the standard dialect Cantonese um, speaker. Um, Typically, when we look at how to define a language or a dialect, mutual intelligibility is a key factor to that definition. Um, so I use the term dialect here to kind of honor the wishes uh, and how the speakers want to identify themselves. It's also a very political definition when you're saying, hey, this is, you know, a whole different language than what you're speaking. Um, so it is also the onomastics. And then another interesting fact that many Cantonese speakers are bi or multilingual, as I mentioned. Um, so yeah, I believe that these are statistics from Hong Kong. Um, Cantonese is by far the most, you know, it is very common as an L1 um, language. And then Mandarin and English are also very common. Okay, so my study, what did I actually do here? What did I contribute? This is a nice little map from the 19th century, I believe 1846. um, of the mainland. So Hong Kong is on an island, and this represents Kowloon and the new territories. So I think you can see my mouse. The village that I was working with was over here, so pretty remote compared to the hustle and the bustle of the island, which would be off pictured off the map. And you can see it was only really the whole area was only industrialized and modernized, let's say, in really recent times. Um, so I worked to interview a speaker and do a careful phonetic transcription. Um, this was based off of the Swedish core vocabulary list, which is pretty common if you review different um, language documentation, literature. That's fairly common. I also included some additional word lists that were that were chosen and able to compare it with previous um, data records. So I had some transcription that itself to looking for minimal pairs, tonal minimal pairs, other phonetic minimal pairs. And essentially, I was comparing the Weitawa with the standard Cantonese dialects for that speaker and also for more generally. I was interested in the phonetic inventory, the tone, and the syllable structure. Yeah, I also did some basic syntax, but most of what we'll go into today is the phonetic side. So the sounds, what sounds do we actually see in this language? So uh, these are similar to what we'll see in a lot of Cantonese. Um, Something that is a little bit outstanding is that we have a uvular stop, which did only occur in um, syllable final position. So at the end of a syllable or of a word. And it was also much less common. So it was difficult to acquire data on that. A lot of the time, um, compared to other Weitawa work, there was missing palatalization. So if you look at the bottom line there, we don't have the palatalization after the alveolar stops, voiceless stops. But what we do see is we have aspiration and we also have uh, rounding after the velar stops there. And here's the vowel chart. The vowel chart was really fun to document, of course. Um, some of these sounds um, were different than the previous literature. The literature wasn't nearly as helpful with coming up with the vowel sounds. In general, there weren't a lot of sources that I had. So a lot of this was independently done and that's one of the reasons why I chose to focus on the more phonetic components rather than the phonology because I didn't have as much to reference. So yeah, which of these sounds do you have in your language? I certainly have most of them, but less of the vowels, I would say. Okay, so I did want to also talk about the tone. This dialect of Weitawa had 9 different tone combinations, which is quite a lot. If you're familiar with tonal languages, um, a standard Cantonese dialect, and I don't like the term standard, but just for the sake of being able to talk about the data, we'll call it standard. Um, Standard Cantonese today has 6 tones, but historically there were closer to 9. Um, 3 of them kind of dropped off. So this is you can see the numerals on the right hand side is what I used. Um, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, there are 9 there. And there were other, you know, ways to represent them on the left using diacritics, but I think because they just became, um, for various reasons, including that it's difficult to type with so many diacritics on the keyboard. The keyboard technology, wasn't quite there 20, 10, 20, 30 years ago. Um, so I would argue that's one of the reasons why we have this numeral system. But the numeral system is typically used when you have Ping, which is writing with Roman characters. So the A B C D E F G alphabet. And essentially it's just we have the high tones, we have midtones, and then we also have falling tones or rising tones. And this can be on um, tones will be on a syllable to syllable level. Each syllable will have its own tone. Um, Other languages, you may have this type of lexical tone across a whole word or a sentential across a whole sentence. This is each syllable has its own tone. So comparing some of the tones from um, the speaker's elicitations, um, you'll see that there are some additional, well, first off, there's an additional lexical item that we have, um, which makes a nice minimal pair. Also, just to clarify, um, another form of tone notation for standard Cantonese today, because it only has because it has a smaller set of tones. One is still the high tone, and like 6 is the low tone. Um, so you can see that there's a general similarity. The tone mapping is somewhat consistent, um, but just the fact that, hey, we have a minimal pair here with 6 different tone combinations, um, you can see how interesting and how how rich the tone is to look at. Some other tone correspondences here, we have a couple different categories. So where the tone is the same is this first set here, tai, tai, ngol, nai, where it's a low falling tone. Those are the words for big, I, and earth. Um, we have some where the low falling tone consistently um, is another tone. So here we have T, T is te, the midtone. Kang is kan. Yu is yu. Not sure why that data is in here. But so you can see from these first two that some of the time the tones um, have a common correspondence. Sorry, this data should actually be in this set. Um, yeah, these are a little bit mixed up. But so sometimes the tone correspondences are different. Um, and sometimes it's a different lexical entry entirely. So if you look at the soy versus call, that's a different lexical item entirely. Nai versus pin is also a different lexical entry. I do apologize for having some of the data points in the wrong categories there, but I hope that's clear. Um, Kind of the method that I used to display the data was using a syllabic dictionary. And this is actually pretty common when you look at different Chinese linguistics dictionaries. You think about are English dictionaries, or I guess in a Portuguese dictionary, it is sorted um, in alphabetical order. So but in Chinese, you'll see these rhyming dictionaries because if you have like a logographic writing system, you can't exactly put it in alphabetical order. Um, but so this syllabic dictionary follows that structure, which you'll see depicted here in IPA or convenience. Um, and so the way that I just organized it was by the manner of articulation, the place of articulation, and then the tone. Um, yeah, so let's look at some of those. Um, this is what that looks like. This is a selection from the fricative. Um, so you can see that's the manner and then the place. So just kind of starting at the alveolar ridge and working back towards the glottal fricatives. Um, and finally the tone. So I did low to high within each category. Yeah, so you'll note that some of these categories have fewer entries than others. There's only a couple with the shoe. With the ash, we have shoe for tree and shoe for bark, which is part of which is only it's a disyllabic word. Shoe pay or shoe pay. Yeah, this is always nice to be a pong, which is red. Okay, so I do have a little bit of the syntax here, which is just building words and sentences. Just some interesting things to note, um, and questions that I have. Are there any sentential patterns and tones? Um, in English, for example, at the end of a sentence, we will have a rising tone if it's a question. So if I wanted to say, how was your morning? Are you having a good morning? We have a rising tone at the end of the sentence. So is that the same in this dialect of Cantonese? And initially, it seems like it is, the tones are the same as they would be. Um, I didn't have any evidence to suggest that they weren't, but again, this was very um, minimal sentence building. I'm not sure that that's a super helpful question. But so we just have some sentences here which demonstrate that it's in subject, verb, object, word order, which is the same as English and the same as other dialects of Cantonese. Um, you'll also see that it like the adjective goes before the noun, as is um, you often see in SVO languages. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to share this slide so you could see some examples of what the sentences look like. And, I think that's a serial verb construction in the bottom in sentence 4. But these are some of the topics that we were working with because there was a lot of agriculture done in this community. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of round out this conversation by talking about what other work can be done um, with this community. Um, excuse me. Reviewing my research design, you could definitely build upon that and interview additional speakers, looking at different factors, particularly age, The speaker that I was working with was, I believe, in his 60s. And he, also uh, spoke English. He wasn't super confident with his English, but we were able to communicate no problem. I'm not fluent in Cantonese, but um, his mother, on the other hand, doesn't speak any English and mainly just speaks in this Weitawa dialect. So if you were to, interview speakers of different age, you might see a more robust uh, set of lexical entries in this dialect. Um, and you might expect some differences. Also, the language use could play into that. Um, so, you know, um, what lexical gaps are there in the speaker? Well, based on the context that we get to use our language, that really helps us with acquisition. Um, Another note about research design, a lot of it was connecting phonetic data. So you could look more at different syntactic patterns. I would recommend that you have a little bit more expertise with Cantonese. If you want to do that, I find that it's helpful to have a good phonetic understanding, just because there's so much with documentation efforts, um, because there's just a lot to do there. You can also look at semantic narrowing, widening. So um, as words are like, how are the words different between the dialects? Maybe some have adapted to fill various needs, social needs or otherwise. Um, and then the problems, which are the less fun aspect of this, is just the funding. It's expensive to conduct research. It's also time consuming. You need a lot of training to be able to do this work realistically. So, you know, um, that's a consideration. The remoteness of speakers as well. So as I showed on one of the earlier slides, it is quite far away from the island. So it's almost towards the mainland of China. It's accessible via train and then a minibus, but it took me probably well over an hour to commute there whenever I was going, and I had a little bit of difficulty with the navigation. So yeah, and then here are just my references. Thank you so much. I really appreciate having this opportunity to share my research, and I hope that you enjoyed. Feel free to send me any questions you may have. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for watching. Did you enjoy the video? Don't forget to like, comment, and share. Thank you to freesoundslibrary.com for the audio used in the intro and outro. And I will see you in the next video.